So much of what makes a setback feel heavier than it needs to be is the amount of energy we spend trying not to look at it directly. Well, hello, my friend, and welcome back to episode 195 of the Redefining Midlife podcast. I'm your host, Jo Clark. Now, we're creeping closer and closer to episode 200 now, which really does feel a bit wild to say out loud after 4 years of doing this together. Now, if you haven't already, I'd really love you to help me celebrate by making sure that you've hit the follow button so that you'll never miss an episode. And also, if you could leave a rating and review or share this podcast with another midlife woman, that would be fabulous. Because my big goal this year is to really grow the number of women listening, and doing any one of those things will genuinely help me to get there. Now, today on the podcast, I want to talk about something that touches every single one of us, no matter how together we might look on the outside. I'm talking about setbacks. Now, not the big dramatic kind necessarily, although sometimes in life that definitely happens, but many setbacks can be the smaller, quieter kind. Could be the job that didn't go the way that you hoped, or the plan that fell through, or the thing you tried that just didn't work. The injury you weren't expecting, the version of you that you thought you'd be by now that hasn't quite yet shown up. No matter how committed you are, or how hard you work, or how organized or focused or determined you are, life is just going to hand you setbacks. And that isn't pessimism, that's just the truth of being a person who is out there living life. And what I want to explore with you today isn't how to avoid setbacks, because in reality you can't. So much is not up to us. But how you can move through them without letting them define you or slow you down for longer than they need to. And I think one of the kindest things that we can do for ourselves is to stop treating setbacks as proof that something has gone wrong with our life, and start treating them as proof that we're actually living it. You can't have a setback if you weren't trying to move forward in the first place. So think about that for a second. A setback only exists because you were reaching for something. And that whole reframe alone changes everything about how it feels to have one. Maybe it was a business idea that you finally worked up the courage to try, and it perhaps didn't take off the way that you pictured it. Maybe it was putting yourself out there again after years of not dating, and it didn't go anywhere. Maybe it was simply deciding that this would be the year that you got healthier, and then life happened and the plan fell apart maybe somewhere around March. Now, none of those things are failures in the way we tend to label them. They're evidence that you were brave enough to want something in the first place. And the women who never had setbacks, well, they aren't the ones doing life well. They're usually the ones who stopped reaching a long time ago. And that's a much sadder outcome than a plan that never worked out. Here's what I've noticed, both in my own lived life and in the women that I sit across from in my workshops or coaching and mentoring spaces. I find that setbacks in midlife feel different to setbacks earlier in life. And when you're in your 20s and something falls apart, well, there's just this quiet assumption underneath it that you've got heaps of time. Things will work out. You've got plenty of time to try again, plenty of time to start over and to figure it out. But when there's a setback that lands in your 40s or 50s or 60s, it can bring a different voice with it. A voice that whispers, you're running out of time. Or perhaps that this is just confirmation of some sort of story that you already half believe about yourself. That you've missed your window. That this is just how it goes for you now. Now, I want to name that because it's one of the reasons that setbacks can hit so much harder at this stage of life. And nobody really talks about it. It isn't just a setback itself. It's everything it seems to confirm underneath it. And that's exactly the kind of thinking this whole show exists to challenge. There is no window that is closed on you. There is no version of your life that has already been decided. A setback at 50 isn't a complete halt to living. It's simply a setback, the same as it would have been at 25. What's happening now is that you're just listening to a much louder voice in your head about it now. And then there's also added weight of comparison at this stage of life. You can look around and everyone seems to be settled. They seem to be sorted or further along the road than you. Somebody else's highlight reel becomes a measuring stick for your very ordinary, very human bad week that you might have had. But you aren't actually seeing their setbacks. You're only seeing the parts that they choose to show. It's their highlight reel. And every woman you admire has had a version of what you're going through right now. And there's a very high probability that she just wasn't sharing it because, let's face it, nobody really likes to share their setbacks with everyone else. Now, something that I find fascinating is just how differently every single one of us might respond when life throws us one of these curveballs. And I don't think there's one right way to respond to a setback, but it can really help to notice your own pattern, because once you see it, you can then start to kind of work with it instead of being run by it. Now, some women I know go straight to blaming themselves. The setback happens, and within about 30 seconds, they've decided it's because they weren't good enough. They didn't try hard enough. They should have known better. Now, if this is you, you already know the voice that I'm talking about. You can probably hear it. It's really fast to arrive, it's harsh, and it rarely gives you the full picture. Then there are the women who do the absolute opposite to that. They just push on through and they refuse to actually feel any of it. They get straight back up, throw themselves into the next thing, and tell everyone, including themselves, that they're fine. I'm great, fine, no worries. Sometimes that looks like strength from the outside. But if you've never actually let yourself feel that disappointment, it just tends to sit there quietly underneath everything else that you do next. Then we've got the avoiders, those who deal with a setback by simply not dealing with it. They get busy, they distract, they might scroll, they clean the whole house, anything that means that they don't have to sit with what just happened. And it usually catches up with them eventually, just in a delayed and slightly messier way. And then we've got the spiralers, the ones for whom one setback quickly becomes evidence for a much bigger and a much bleaker story. Now, spiralers tell themselves it always happens to them. Nothing ever works out. Why do I even bother? One disappointing thing happens, and suddenly it isn't just about that one thing anymore. It's about everything. And then we have the fixers, the ones who can't sit with a setback until it's all solved. They go straight into that planning mode, making lists, researching solutions, or trying to control every piece of it. Because moving feels safer than feeling. That can look incredibly productive from the outside, and sometimes it is. But underneath all of it, there's often a quiet refusal to just let the disappointment exist for a moment before jumping in to fix it. Now, and just to be clear, none of these ways are wrong, and you're probably not purely one type or the other, because most of us are a blend of all of these different types, depending on the day and depending on what that setback might actually be. But I do think there's real value in noticing which one you lean towards, because that awareness is actually the first strategy before we even get to the rest of them. So let's talk about what actually helps, because noticing your pattern is a great start, but you do need somewhere to go from there. Now, the first thing is simply to name it. Say it out loud, or write it down, or say it to a friend. That didn't go the way I wanted it to, that this is a setback. It almost sounds too simple to matter, but so much of what makes a setback feel heavier than it needs to be is the amount of energy we spend trying not to look at it directly. The moment you name it plainly, without dressing it or without minimizing it, you take away some of the power of it. Now, you can't move through something you're still pretending isn't happening. Now, the second thing is to expect the discomfort instead of being ambushed by it. And this one, personally for me, took a long time to learn. I used to think that if I was doing life right, setbacks shouldn't hurt this much or shouldn't throw me off so badly. But discomfort isn't a sign that you're handling it badly. It just is what it feels like when something that you really cared about doesn't go the way you hoped. If you can walk into hard seasons already knowing there will be a stretch when it feels rough, you stop being surprised by the roughness. And that alone can make it easier to sit with. You aren't failing at resilience because it hurts. It's meant to hurt a bit when you've got a setback. That's how you know it mattered. I think about it a bit like the weather. When there's heavy rain that's genuinely on its way, you're not going to be standing outside in your best clothes and act surprised when you get absolutely soaked to the bone. What you do is you grab a coat, you grab an umbrella, and you plan around that wet weather event. You simply accept that it's going to be part of what it's going to be. You're simply just going to be wet and maybe even a bit miserable. And you just keep on going through it anyway. Setbacks work the same way. You can't stop the rain from falling, but you can stop being shocked by the fact that rain exists in the first place. And the third thing is looking for what it's teaching you. And I want to be careful here because I'm not talking about forcing yourself to find a silver lining 5 minutes after something falls apart on you. That isn't resilience. That's bypassing. What I'm talking about and what I mean is that once you've actually let yourself feel the disappointment, once some time has actually passed, it's going to be worth going back and asking what this showed you, what it showed you about the situation, about what you actually want, about what you'll do differently next time. Not because everything happens for a reason, like I'm not even sure that I even believe that, but because you get to decide what a setback means for you going forward from here. And that meaning is genuinely up to you to choose. Sometimes what it teaches you is practical. Maybe it's just a plan that needed adjusting. Maybe it was a boundary that needed setting, that a person who wasn't quite as reliable as you had hoped had been there. And sometimes what it teaches you is simply that you can survive something that you are absolutely dreading. And that in itself isn't a small thing to walk away with. Every time you get through a setback, even if it is a messy one, even one that took you longer to recover from than you would have liked, you're quietly building proof for yourself that you're more capable than the version of you who hasn't been tested yet. And the fourth thing is letting the right people tell you the truth without turning it into a reason to punish yourself. Now, there's a real difference between feedback and self-attack. And when you're in the middle of a setback, it's really easy to confuse those two. Now, if someone you trust, someone who is actually on your side, has something honest to say about what had happened, let yourself hear it without immediately using it as ammunition against yourself. You can take in useful feedback and still be kind to yourself at the same time. Those two things aren't in competition, even though it often feels like they are. The key word here is trusted. Not everybody gets a say in how you process a setback. Now, some people will hand you their opinion in a nanosecond without you even asking for it. And their opinion or feedback isn't automatically true just because they said it with confidence. So get really selective about whose voice you actually let in when you're going through a hard season or time. A trusted person is going to tell you the truth because they want you to get back up. Someone else might be just projecting their own fears onto your situation. Remember, you are allowed to say thank you and then quietly decide not to take that advice or feedback on board. Now, the fifth thing, and maybe the most important one, in fact, is staying kind to yourself while you're still in it, not just when you're safely through the other side of whatever the setback may have been. And this is a one most of us skip. We tell ourselves we'll be gentle with ourselves once we've fixed it or once we've proven that we can bounce back. Once we're on the other side, looking strong again. But you deserve compassion in the middle of that mess, not just as a reward for getting out of it. Talk to yourself the way you would talk to a child or to a friend who is going through exactly what you're going through right now. And if you wouldn't say it to her, don't say it to yourself. Picture her sitting across from you right now, telling you exactly what happened to you this week. Would you tell her she's hopeless, that she should have known better, that this is just further proof that she can't get anything right? Of course you wouldn't. You would probably put the kettle on and tell her that this is hard and it makes total sense that it hurts. And you'd also remind her of everything she's already come through before this. And that's the voice you're allowed to use on yourself too. It isn't indulgent. It isn't making excuses. It's simply treating yourself like someone worth being gentle with, especially when things aren't going to plan. And I'll be honest with you, like all women who have reached this stage of life, when we're in midlife, well, for me, I've had my fair share of setbacks over the years. Some of them have been small, and some of them have been the kind that knocked the wind out of me for a while. I've had plans that fell apart, things I built that didn't go anywhere near the way that I'd hoped they would, and seasons where I genuinely wondered if I've got it all wrong. And if there's one thing I've learned from going through enough of these setbacks, is that the women who move through the setbacks faster are almost never the ones who fall down. They're the ones who stop trying to do it entirely on their own. These women asked for help. They let someone else hold a bit of the weight while they have found their feet again. I know that firsthand, because every single time that I've tried to white knuckle my way through something really hard by myself, it's taken so much longer than it needed to. The times I recovered fastest were always the times that I let someone else in early, instead of waiting until I had already exhausted myself trying to carry it all alone. That's a big part of why I created this podcast, in fact, and my business, why I built things like Rediscover You, and why my private coaching and mentoring spaces exist. Not because you can't get through a setback all on your own, not that at all. You absolutely can, but because you don't have to. Sometimes what actually speeds things up is having some support around you while you find your way back to steady ground again, instead of just quietly working it out alone in the dark. So here in a nutshell is what I want you to take with you today. Setbacks aren't proof that something has gone wrong with your life. They're simply proof that you're out there living life, reaching for things, for trying, that you're caring about outcomes. And notice how you tend to respond when they happen, because that awareness alone can change how much power that they've got over you. Name it when it happens. Expect discomfort instead of being surprised by it. And look for what it's teaching you once you've actually felt it. Let the right people tell you the truth and seek support to help you through it. And stay kind to yourself the whole way through, not just once you've made it through to the other side. You're allowed to fall down. You're allowed to feel it when you do. And you're allowed to get back up in your own time, in your own way, with people around you if you want them. That isn't weakness. That's simply what it looks like to be human and still be trying. That's what I want you to remember this week. A setback doesn't get to write your whole story for you. It's not the end of everything. You are still holding the pen, and you still get to decide what's going to come next. Well, my friend, I really do look forward to being with you again next week. And until then, take care. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate, follow, and share it with another incredible midlife woman. And join me next week as we keep creating an amazing second half of life.